Abigail Carter pressed her mother's deed against her chest with both hands, the only thing left in this world that no lawyer could touch, and looked straight at the man who had just told an entire town she would not last the summer. Her hands were shaking, not from grief, not from fear, from the kind of rage that turns a woman who has lost everything into something no one sees coming. If you've ever been counted out by someone who didn't know your name, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow Abigail all the way to the end, and drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon stopped at the edge of Harlan Creek just before noon, and every soul in that small Kentucky town seemed to pause what they were doing to watch. Word had traveled fast, the way words always did in places where people had too much time and too little grace. They knew who was coming before the wheels ever ground to a halt in the summer dust. They knew her name. They knew her shame. And most of them had already decided the ending of her story before she had even begun to live it. Abigail Carter stepped down from that wagon without taking the driver's hand. She was 26 years old. Her dress was clean, but it was not fine. Her boots were worn at the heel. She carried a single leather trunk, a folded deed paper tucked inside her coat, and nothing else in this world that belonged to her. The town spread out before her: a general store, a blacksmith shop, a church with a crooked steeple, a tavern with 3 horses tied out front, and a collection of wooden storefronts baking in the July heat. Men leaned against porch rails. Women in bonnets slowed their walking. Children stopped mid-chase and stared with open mouths. Abigail did not look at any of them. She looked at the road ahead, the one that wound north out of town toward the property listed on the deed. The property her father had purchased 14 years ago as a young man with ambitions larger than his fortune, a piece of Kentucky bottomland that he had never once visited, because Virginia society had always been more comfortable than frontier hope. Her father was dead now. The Virginia estate was gone, swallowed whole by debts she had not known existed until the lawyers arrived with their papers and their cold eyes. Her aunt in Richmond had offered her a room and a life of quiet dependency. Her cousin in Baltimore had offered her work as a seamstress, bent over a table in a back room, useful and invisible. Abigail had thanked them both and refused. She had taken the deed from the bottom of her father's desk drawer, the one document the creditors could not touch, because the land had been purchased under a separate account in her mother's maiden name. A clerical error, a stroke of luck, a small mercy from a God she had spent several months being furious at. She had taken that deed, and she had come to Kentucky. That's her then. The voice came from the direction of the tavern porch. A heavy-set man in a brown coat leaning back in a chair, speaking just loud enough to be heard. Carter's girl, the ruined one. His companion, younger, with a thin mustache he had not yet earned, snorted. She don't look ruined. She looks like she's going to a funeral. Her own? The first man said and laughed. Abigail heard every word. She kept walking. The wagon driver, an older man named Elias, who had brought her from Louisville, with barely 3 sentences exchanged between them, called down from his seat. Miss Carter, the road north gets rough past the mill. You sure you don't want me to take you further? I'm sure, she said. Ain't much out there but old timber and creek mud. I know what's out there. She did not know what was out there. She had read the land survey twice and studied a hand-drawn map that might have been accurate in 1802 and might not have been accurate at all. But she was not going to say that to Elias, and she was certainly not going to say it within earshot of the man on the tavern porch. She kept walking. She had gone perhaps 40 steps when a woman's voice, sharp and carrying the particular tone of someone who had appointed herself the moral authority of an entire county, cut across the road. Someone ought to tell her the house out there hasn't had a roof worth mentioning in 6 years. Abigail stopped. She turned around very slowly and looked at the woman who had spoken. Middle-aged, well-dressed by Harlan Creek standards, standing in front of the dry goods store with a basket over her arm and an expression that managed to combine pity and pleasure in equal measure. Thank you, Abigail said clearly and without warmth. I'll keep that in mind. Then she turned back around and kept walking. She heard laughter behind her. Not kind laughter. The laughter of people watching someone they had already decided would fail, finding the first evidence of their prediction amusing. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her sides and walked faster. The property was 3 miles north of town, and the road was every bit as rough as Elias had warned. By the time the farmhouse came into view through the summer heat, Abigail's boots were caked with red clay mud from a creek crossing, and her hair had come half loose from its pins. She stopped when she saw it. She had told herself she was prepared. She had told herself that the land survey description structure in need of repair, approximately 40 acres of bottomland, one outbuilding creek access, had given her realistic expectations. She had not been realistic enough. The farmhouse listed hard to the left, as though it had spent 6 years trying to lie down and hadn't quite managed it. The porch had partially collapsed on one end. 2 windows on the south side were open to the air, their shutters hanging by single hinges. The front door stood open because the latch appeared to have given up entirely. The barn, the outbuilding, was in better shape than the house, which was not a compliment to the barn so much as an indictment of the house. Abigail stood in the road and looked at all of it for a long moment. Then she walked up to the front door, pushed it fully open, and went inside. The interior was dim and smelled of old wood and something that had once been a mouse and was now a memory. The floor was sound. She tested it carefully before committing her weight, and the main room was larger than she had expected. A stone fireplace dominated the north wall. The chimney looked intact. The kitchen was through a low doorway, and beyond that she could hear the sound of moving water close enough to be the creek running behind the property. The roof above the main room had a hole about the size of a wash basin in the northeast corner. Light fell through it in a straight white column onto the floor. She stood under that column of light and looked up at the sky. Then she set down her trunk, took out the deed, and smoothed it flat on the windowsill in the light from the broken shutter. The land was hers. Whatever the house was, whatever the roof was, however far gone the porch and the shutters and the latch and every other thing, the land was hers. No creditor could touch it. No aunt with a spare room and a charitable expression could reduce her to it. No cousin with a sewing table in a back room could diminish her to that. This was hers. She folded the deed and put it back inside her coat. Then she took off her good jacket, hung it on the one peg by the door that still held, rolled up her sleeves, and began to assess exactly how much trouble she was in. The answer was a great deal of trouble. She spent the rest of that afternoon moving through the property room by room, outbuilding to fence line, listing what she had and what she needed and what she was going to have to figure out how to do herself, because there was no one else to do it. What she had, the 40 acres, the creek water, the stone fireplace and chimney, a sound floor throughout most of the house. 3 walls of the barn that were solid, a kitchen with a workable iron stove that only needed cleaning, and a root cellar beneath the kitchen floor that was dry and cool and empty. What she needed: roof repair on both the house and the remaining barn wall. Window shutters, rehung or replaced a functioning door, latch firewood. Enough for the nights that were still cool, even in summer, seeds for a kitchen garden, if she could get the ground broken in time for a late planting, and food to last her through the breaking-in period before any of that produced anything. What she was going to have to figure out most of it. She had $12. It was everything she had in the world, beyond the deed and the clothes in her trunk. She had carried it knotted in a handkerchief at the bottom of her coat pocket. The entire journey from Louisville, checking it at every stop the way a person checks for a heartbeat. $12. In 1816, Kentucky, that was not nothing. A laborer earned about $4 a month. Cornmeal was cheap. Nails were not cheap, but were not ruinous. She could buy what she needed for immediate repair if she spent carefully and did most of the labor herself. She had never done most of the labor herself. She had grown up with servants and then lived in diminishing circumstances that still involved servants until the very end. She knew how to manage a household. She knew how to direct the people who did the physical work. She did not know how to replace a roof shutter. She was going to learn. She was sitting on the edge of the collapsed porch end, making her mental list and watching the summer evening settle over the creek pasture when she heard a horse. Not on the road. Coming across the pasture from the west, from the direction of the large spread of buildings she had noticed about a mile over, a proper working farm with barns and fenced paddocks and the general appearance of prosperity. The rider came straight toward her property at an easy pace. A big gray horse, the kind of animal that cost more than $12 by a significant margin. The rider sat it the way people sit horses when they have ridden their whole lives and stopped thinking about it, completely still, from the waist up, unhurried, assured. He pulled up at the fence line and looked at her across the space between. He was somewhere in his middle 30s. Dark hair, a few days of beard that was not quite yet a beard. A good coat that had been worn hard and often. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had added something to it over time, not age exactly, but weight. The weight of someone who had made serious decisions and carried them. He looked at the house. He looked at her sitting on the broken porch. He looked at the house again. Then he looked back at her. "You, the Carter girl," he said. It was not an insult the way he said it. It was not what the man on the tavern porch had made it. It was simply a question from someone gathering information. "I'm Miss Carter," she said. "Abigail Carter. And you are Nathaniel Brooks." He did not move toward the gate. "I own the property to the west of yours. The creek runs through both parcels." "I know," she said. "I read the survey." Something shifted in his expression. Almost imperceptible, but she caught it, a slight recalibration, the way a man adjusts when something is not quite what he expected. "Been a long time since anyone's been out here," he said. "6 years, I understand. Since the last tenants left." "About that." A silence. The kind that was waiting for something. "I'll tell you straight," he said, "because I suspect you'd rather hear it straight." "I would. This property's been going to ruin since the Carter estate let it sit. I've had my eye on it a couple of years now. Would have written to the estate about buying it except—" He paused. "Well, things changed, I understand, with the estate." "Things changed," Abigail said evenly. "I'd offer you a fair price. Better than fair. It'd set you up comfortable somewhere. Louisville maybe, or back east." She looked at him steadily. He was not unkind, she thought. He was practical. He saw a problem, a woman alone, a ruined property, an obvious mismatch of capacity to challenge, and he was offering a practical solution. She understood it completely. She also had no intention of taking it. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," she said. "That's a generous offer. The answer is no." He studied her. "You've seen the roof." "I've seen the roof." "And the porch." "And the porch, Miss Carter." He shifted in the saddle, not impatiently, but with the manner of a man choosing his next words carefully. "I don't say this to be discouraging. I say it because it's the truth. A woman alone cannot manage this property. Not in its current state. Not without Mr. Brooks." Her voice was quiet. It was not sharp. It was the voice of someone who is very tired and very certain at the same time. "I know what you're about to say. I've heard some version of it my entire life, and I have heard several louder versions of it today in your town. I appreciate that you mean it kindly, but the answer is still no. This land is mine. I intend to keep it." Another silence. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men sometimes looked at women, assessing and summarizing, but with something more considered. Like he was reading a document and finding it more complicated than the title suggested. "All right," he said at last. "All right? All right, Miss Carter." He gathered his reins. "The creek's free use for both properties. If you need the water diverted at any point for your kitchen garden, let me know. We can work that out." She blinked. She had expected more argument. She had been prepared for more argument. "Thank you," she said, slightly thrown. He nodded once, touched the brim of his hat, a brief formal gesture, and turned the horse west across the pasture. She watched him go. Then she turned back to the house, to the listing walls, and the broken porch and the roof, with its wash basin-sized hole, letting in the last of the day's light. "All right," she said quietly to herself and the house and the creek and the whole watching summer evening. And she went inside to figure out where she was going to sleep. She slept on the floor of the main room, her trunk positioned to block the worst of the draft from the open windows. Her coat spread over her because her blankets were at the bottom of the trunk, and she was too tired to unpack them properly. She did not sleep well. The sounds of a house she did not know and a landscape she did not know kept pulling her back to the surface. The creak and owl somewhere in the tree line, the creak and settle of old wood adjusting to the night. At one point, she was certain something small was moving in the kitchen, and she lay very still listening to it until it stopped, and then she lay awake for a while longer, thinking about what she was going to need to do about that. She rose before dawn. She built a fire in the kitchen stove, because the operation took her 3 attempts and a significant amount of trial and error, and she wanted to know how to do it before she was cold and desperate, rather than merely cool and embarrassed. By the 3rd attempt, she had a proper fire going and a pot of water heating, and she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the warm stove wall and let herself feel for just a moment the particular satisfaction of having solved a small problem entirely on her own. It was a very small problem. There were very large problems coming. She sat with both of those facts and then stood up and got to work. She went to town the next morning. She had thought carefully about how to do it. She needed supplies: nails, rope, a new latch plate, cornmeal, and salt pork seeds if anyone had late-season kitchen garden seeds, and she could not avoid the town to get them. She also could not afford to let the town get the better of her. She put on her second-best dress, which was plain but neat, pinned her hair properly, and walked the 3 miles to Harlan Creek, with her spine straight and her face composed. The general store was run by a man named Whitfield, heavyset, 50-ish, with the deliberate manner of someone who had decided long ago that the best way to conduct business was never to be the first one to say anything. He looked at her when she came through the door. He waited. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Abigail Carter. I've taken possession of the Carter property north of town. I need some things." She put her list on the counter. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked up the list and read it through with careful attention. "Nails," he said. "Yes." "What gauge?" She paused one beat. "For roof shutter repair." He pulled the right bin without asking anything else, which she appreciated. They worked through the list in order, him gathering and her calculating against her $12 making cuts. When she had to, the rope was an unexpected expense. She would need to come back for seeds another time. She was almost through when the bell above the door rang, and 2 women came in, and the atmosphere in the store changed the way it changes when people walk in, who are accustomed to changing atmospheres. She recognized one of them, the woman with the basket from the day before, the one who had announced the state of her roof to the entire road. "Mr. Whitfield," the woman said brightly. "Did I see a wagon from—" She stopped, looked at Abigail. "Gail." "Oh, Mrs. Holt," Whitfield said. The woman named Mrs. Holt gathered herself with the efficiency of someone who had never once in her life been caught at a disadvantage. She did not immediately convert to an advantage. "Miss Carter," she said with the smile of a person who is about to perform generosity. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to speak properly. I said to Ruth just this morning—" "I remember what you said yesterday, Mrs. Holt," Abigail said pleasantly. "About the roof." A brief silence. "I only meant, I know what you meant." Abigail turned back to Whitfield. "I'll take what we've got on the counter, please. I'll come back for the rest when I have it." She paid. She took her wrapped parcels. She thanked Whitfield, who had the good grace to look slightly embarrassed on behalf of his town. She turned and walked to the door. Mrs. Holt spoke to her back. "You know, my husband could introduce you to some people in Louisville. There are positions—" Abigail stopped with her hand on the door. She turned around. "Mrs. Holt," she said. Her voice was still pleasant. Her eyes were not. "I have a property. I have materials. I have 2 hands, and I am not afraid of work. I don't need a position in Louisville, and I don't need an introduction. What I would appreciate from you and from the rest of this town is to be left alone to manage my own affairs." She opened the door. "Good day," she said, and left. She was halfway down the road before she heard the footsteps behind her. "Miss Carter." She did not stop. "I'm not in the mood for more advice, Mr. Brooks." "I don't have any." He fell into step beside her. He was on foot, which surprised her. She had expected the gray horse. "I was in the store." "I noticed." "You handled that well." I don't need your opinion on how I handle things. No, he said. You don't. A pause. I also don't have any opinion to offer. I just said you handled it well. She glanced sideways at him despite herself. He was looking straight ahead, carrying his own parcels completely unbothered, as if this were a perfectly normal conversation between neighbors who had met twice. You're going back north, she said. I'm going to my property, yes, which is north. Then we can walk together if you're going to be quiet. I can be quiet, he said. That was for almost a full minute, which she thought was probably a record for him. The latch plate you bought, he said. You said quiet. I know, the latch plate you bought is the wrong size for a standard door frame from that era. The Carter house was built around 1800. They used a broader frame then. Abigail stopped walking. She looked at the parcel in her hand. She looked at him. How do you know what size latch plate the Carter house needs? Because I've looked at that house every time I've ridden past it for 2 years, thinking about what I'd need to fix if I bought it. He met her eyes steadily. I'll take you back to Whitfield's. He'll exchange it. She looked at him for a long moment. You could have said that in the store, she said. You were in the middle of something in the store. She considered this. Fine, she said. We'll go back. They walked back to Whitfield's, exchanged the latch plate. Whitfield did not comment, and she thought he was probably a better man than his town deserved, and then turned north again. This time, Brooks did not offer conversation. He walked at her pace, carried his parcels, and looked at the road. When they reached the fork where the north track split off toward her property, he stopped. There's a stand of good timber on the west side of my property, he said. Already fallen. If you need lumber for the porch repair, you're welcome to take it. It's been seasoning 2 years, good and dry. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because it's of no use to me where it's sitting, and your porch is about to take the rest of that south end down with it if you don't address it. That's not... She stopped. I mean, why are you being helpful? You want my land. I did want your land, he said. You're clearly not selling it. I adjust to facts, Miss Carter. It's your land. You're my neighbor. Good fences make good neighbors, and so does offering timber when you need it. She studied him carefully. There was nothing in his face that she could find to distrust. It was just a face, serious and tired and sun-weathered, looking back at her without apology or performance. The timber would be useful, she said. I'll have 2 of my men bring it over tomorrow morning, he said. You don't owe me anything for it. I'll pay for the labor. You will not. Mr. Brooks. Miss Carter. He said it with the precise amount of firmness to close a negotiation without being rude about it. You have $12 and a ruined farmhouse. I have more timber than I need and 2 men who can carry it in under an hour. This is a neighborly thing. Neighborhoods function on neighborly things. Let it be what it is. She hated that he knew about the $12. She did not know how he knew, and she did not ask because the answer did not matter, and she was too tired to be angry about one more thing today. Thank you, she said, for the timber and the latch plate information. You're welcome. He touched the brim of his hat. Good evening, Miss Carter. He went west. She went north. She carried her parcels up the road to her falling-down house, and she sat on the portion of the porch that had not yet collapsed, and she watched the summer dark come in over the Kentucky hills. She thought about Mrs. Holt and her basket and her smooth, efficient smile. She thought about the men on the tavern porch who had already written the ending of her story. She thought about Nathaniel Brooks, who had adjusted to facts. Then she went inside, unpacked her blankets properly this time, and slept better than she had the night before. The timber arrived the next morning as promised. 2 young men who worked for Brooks brought it in a flat wagon, stacked it beside the barn, without a word, beyond a polite greeting, and left before she could do more than thank them. She spent the next 4 days on the porch repair. She had never held a hammer with any serious intention before. By the end of the first day, her right hand was blistered in 3 places, and she had hit her thumb twice, and the work she had accomplished was less than she had planned. By the end of the second day, she had found her rhythm. She worked slower than a man would have, perhaps, but steadier. And she thought carefully before each decision, which meant she made fewer decisions she had to undo. By the end of the fourth day, the south end of the porch was repaired. It was not beautiful work. The joins were not the work of a craftsman, but the boards were sound and the weight was distributed correctly, and when she stood on it and jumped once hard, it did not move. She stood on her repaired porch and looked out at her 40 acres in the morning light, and felt something she had not felt since before the lawyers arrived with their papers. Not happiness exactly, not relief, something older and quieter than either. She was here. She had done this. Whatever came next, she had done this. On the fifth morning, Brooks rode past on the gray horse. He slowed when he saw the porch. He looked at it for a long moment. "You did that yourself," he said. It was not quite a question. "I did." He looked at it again. She could not read his expression from where she stood at the top of the steps. "It's good work," he said. "It's serviceable work," she said. "I know the difference." Something moved in his face again. That same fractional recalibration she had seen at the fence line on the first day. Like she kept refusing to be the thing he expected. "Yes," he said. "I suppose you do." He did not offer anything else. No further help, no further assessment of her situation. No new version of the reasonable offer she had refused. He simply looked at the porch she had built with her own blistered hands, nodded once, and rode on west. She watched him go. Then she went inside to plan the roof repair, which was going to be considerably more difficult than the porch, and would require her to figure out how to climb to a height that made her stomach uncertain, and she was not going to ask anyone for help with that either. She was not going to ask anyone for anything if she could manage it. She had come here to prove that she could manage. She intended to manage. Whatever it took. The roof nearly killed her. Not in any dramatic way. No collapse, no fall. No moment of crisis that would have made a good story to tell later. It nearly killed her in the way that exhaustion kills slowly and without announcement, accumulating across 3 days of work that her body had no framework for and her pride refused to quit. She had gotten up there by building a ladder from the fallen timber scraps, testing each rung 3 times before trusting her weight to it. The first morning she spent half an hour at the base of the ladder before she climbed it, not from fear, but from the cold calculation of a woman who understood that a broken ankle out here 3 miles from town with no one expecting her was a death sentence of the quiet, drawn-out variety. She thought through every step. She planned every movement. Then she climbed. The hole in the roof was larger than it had looked from below. That was the first lesson. The second lesson was that patching a roof was not 1 skill, but 6, and she had to learn all 6 by doing them wrong first, and then doing them again. By the end of day 1, she had the edges of the damaged section cleared and the framing assessed and 1 board replaced. She sat on the roof in the fading July light and looked out over 40 acres of bottomland and creek pasture and thought, this is going to take longer than I planned. She was right. It took 4 more days. On the 3rd day of roof work, she heard a rider stop below and looked down to find Brooks sitting on the gray horse, looking up at her with an expression she could not entirely read from that height. "You're on the roof," he said. "I am," she said. "How long have you been up there?" "Since morning." He looked at the work she had done, the replaced boards, the new framing along the east edge, the half-finished patching that still needed another layer. He looked at it for a long time. "You're setting the pitch wrong on the south edge," he said finally. "Water's going to run back instead of off." She looked at where he was pointing. She looked at what she had done. She thought about arguing. Then she looked again and saw that he was right. "How do I fix it?" she said. He told her. He did it without theatrics, without any tone of victory at being right, just clearly, and in the order she would need to do it. She listened, asked 2 questions, got the answers, and went back to work. He rode on after that. She fixed the pitch on the south edge. By the time she came down from the roof on the final day, she had a repaired surface that would not win any prizes, but would hold water through a Kentucky winter. She had also developed muscles in her arms and shoulders that had not previously existed, and a practical relationship with heights that had begun in terror and arrived somewhere in the vicinity of grudging respect. She stood in the main room and looked up at the ceiling. No column of light, no sky visible through her roof. She sat down on the floor right there and did not cry, because she had made herself a promise about that early, on a strict private rule about not crying over things she had accomplished. But she sat there for a while with her eyes closed and her hands still, and let herself feel it, the whole weight of what she had done, and what it meant, and what it was going to keep costing her. Then she got up and started on the windows. 3 weeks into her time at the property, the town of Harlan Creek had sorted itself into 3 camps regarding Abigail Carter. The first camp, which was the largest, continued to predict her failure with the comfortable certainty of people who have invested their opinion in an outcome and are waiting for the world to deliver it. These were Mrs. Holt's people, the tavern porch. People, the people who found the entire situation alternately amusing and mildly offensive. A ruined woman from Virginia, a fallen-down house, a piece of land not worth the deed it was written on. It was the kind of story they liked because it confirmed what they already believed about pride and its consequences. The second camp was smaller and quieter. These were the people who had watched her walk back into Whitfield's store with her spine straight and exchange a latch plate without apology, and had thought something they hadn't entirely put into words yet. Whitfield himself was in this camp. A woman named Pearl, who ran the laundry at the edge of town, was in this camp. The pastor of the crooked steepled church, Reverend Aldous, who had seen a great deal in his 60 years and had stopped being surprised by human capacity in either direction, was probably in this camp, though he kept his own counsel. The third camp was one person, and that person was Nathaniel Brooks, and Abigail could not figure out what camp he was actually in. He rode past her property every few days, sometimes stopping, sometimes not. When he stopped, it was never for long and always with a specific purpose. To mention the creek water levels were running higher than usual, and she should check her root cellar drainage, to tell her that the Hendersons 3 miles east would sell seed corn at a fair price if she needed it. Still to point out once very briefly that the chimney cap was loose and would come off in any serious wind, and she should address it before it did. He never offered to do anything himself. He offered information and then left her to act on it, which she found more respectful than most of the help she had been offered in her life. She mentioned the Henderson seed corn to Pearl at the laundry, where she had begun bringing her washing, because Pearl charged a fair price and was the only person in Harlan Creek who managed to be both honest and quiet at the same time. "Nathaniel Brooks told you that," Pearl said, wringing out a shirt with the economy of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "He did." Pearl made a sound that was not quite a word. "What?" Abigail said. "Nothing. He's a private man." "I've gathered. Lost his wife 5 years ago," Pearl said, and said it the same way she said everything, like it was just another piece of information. "Fever. He had a son. The boy died the same winter 2 months after. He hasn't been what you'd call warm since then." Abigail was quiet. "I'm not telling you that for any reason," Pearl said, looking up at her with clear eyes. "I'm just telling you so you understand what you're dealing with. He's not unfriendly. He's just mostly gone somewhere that people can't reach." "I'm not trying to reach him," Abigail said. "I know," Pearl said. "That's probably why he keeps stopping by." She got the chimney cap secured. She got the window shutters rehung, all of them, even the pair on the north side, that required her to build a secondary brace, because the original mounting had rotted through. She got her kitchen garden in late, too late for most vegetables, but not too late for turnips and kale, and a variety of pole bean that Pearl said would push through anything, and she got the creek diversion set up, so the water ran closer to the garden, and she did not have to carry buckets the full distance twice a day. She learned things every day. She learned them the hard way by doing them wrong, by listening when someone offered information without strings attached, by watching and asking careful questions of people who had no particular investment in her failing or succeeding. She learned which boards in the barn floor were worth saving and which had to come out. She learned how to read the creek level by a mark on the eastern bank stone and know when to check the root cellar. She learned that Pearl was the single best source of practical information in Harlan Creek, because Pearl had fixed everything in her own laundry herself for 20 years and had never once waited for a man to do it. She did not make friends in Harlan Creek. That was not what this was, not yet. But she began to be a presence, a real one, a woman who showed up to Whitfield's store with a list and money and no time for Mrs. Holt, who nodded to Reverend Aldous when she passed the church, who left 2 extra bunches of kale outside Pearl's door when the garden came in because Pearl had mentioned just once, that kale kept well and she had a fondness for it. She did not know if it mattered. She was too busy to worry about whether it mattered. But she did it anyway because she was building something here, not just a house, not just a farm. Something that had to do with how a person stood in the world, and she intended to build it properly. The first serious test came in the 5th week, and it came from a direction she had not anticipated. She was in the barn working on the floor repair when she heard a wagon come up the north road and stop outside. Not Brooks's horse, a wagon, and more than one set of voices. She came out wiping her hands on her work apron to find 2 men she did not recognize sitting on the seat of a loaded wagon, looking at her property with the assessing eyes of people making calculations. "Morning," the older one said. He had a broad face and a professional smile, the kind worn by men who deal in agreements. "This the Carter place?" "It is," she said. "I'm Abigail Carter." "Yes, ma'am." He reached into his coat and brought out a folded document. "We're from the Harlan County Land Office. We've had a claim filed against this property." The world tilted slightly. "A claim," she said. "Yes, ma'am, against the deed." He held out the document. "If you'd take a look." She took it. She read it. She read it twice because the first time she did not trust what she was seeing. The claim was filed by a man named Gerald Tate, identifying himself as a creditor of the Carter estate. He was asserting that this property, her 40 acres, and the house she had spent 5 weeks repairing had been purchased with estate funds and therefore should have been included in the estate's assets when the debts were settled. He was claiming ownership. Her hands had gone completely still. "This is fraudulent," she said. "Ma'am, this land was purchased under my mother's maiden name. It was a separate account established before my parents married. The creditors reviewed all accounts when the estate was settled, and this deed was excluded because it legally had no connection to the estate debt." She looked up from the document. "Whoever filed this claim knows that, which means this is not a claim, it's an attempt at theft." The man with the professional smile had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable. "Miss Carter, I'm just delivering the notice. You'll need to appear before the county magistrate in 6 weeks to dispute the claim. If you have documentation, I have the deed. You'll need more than the deed, ma'am. You'll need documentation of the separate account, proof of purchase origin, ideally legal counsel." "Legal counsel," she repeated. She thought about her $12, which was now $4 and some change, because the roof and the windows and the seed corn had eaten the rest, and she was living on turnips and kale and the occasional egg from the 3 hens she had acquired from the Henderson farm in exchange for 2 days of labor. "How much time did you say?" she said. 6 weeks. "Thank you," she said, "for the notice." The man with the smile nodded, relieved to be done with the conversation, and the wagon turned around and went back south. Abigail stood in the road and looked at the document in her hands. Gerald Tate. She did not know that name. She had never heard it in Richmond, never seen it on any of the estate paperwork, never encountered it in the long and brutal months of watching her father's life get itemized and sold. But someone had filed this claim, and they had filed it specifically against this property, which meant someone had done research and found the one thing she had and gone after it. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table with the document and thought. She thought for a long time. Then she thought about what Pearl had said about Reverend Aldous, that he had been a lawyer in his previous life, before he found religion more interesting than litigation. She had filed that information away the way. She filed everything in the practical ledger of her mind, under useful future reference. She stood up, put the document in her coat, and walked to town. Reverend Aldous was in the church garden when she found him, which she thought was appropriate for a man who had traded one kind of argument for another. He listened to her without interrupting, which she appreciated enormously. When she finished, he held out his hand for the document and read it through twice, just as she had. "Gerald Tate," he said. "Do you know him?" "I know of him. He's a land speculator out of Louisville. Buys up disputed properties at reduced prices and resells them." He handed the document back. "He's done this before. finds estates with overlooked parcels, files questionable claims, pressures the parties to sell rather than fight. He picked the wrong party, Abigail said. Aldous looked at her with something that was not quite a smile. So I'm beginning to think, he said. What do you have for documentation? The deed. Letters from my father that reference the property as separate from the estate. I believe the original bank records from my mother's account exist in Richmond. I'll need to write for them. 6 weeks is tight for records from Richmond. I know. You'll also need someone to speak to your character and to the legitimacy of your claim at the hearing. A local witness carries weight with Magistrate Conley. Who would do that? She said. Not bitterly, practically. She had been in Harlan Creek 5 weeks. She knew Pearl and Whitfield and the Reverend himself, and none of them were what the magistrate would call a prominent voice. Aldous thought for a moment. Brooks might, he said. She went very still. He's the most respected landholder in the county. Aldous continued, unaware of or indifferent to her stillness. His word carries more weight with Conley than anyone else's, and he's been known to— He paused. Well, he doesn't involve himself in other people's business generally, but there have been exceptions. Abigail looked at the document in her hand. She thought about the gray horse at the fence line, the correct latch plate, the timber she had not been allowed to pay for, the chimney cap she had been told about before it became a crisis. She thought about how much she did not want to ask Nathaniel Brooks for anything. I'll think about it, she said. She went home and wrote 3 letters to Richmond that afternoon, one to the bank, one to her father's former solicitor, one to the one cousin she trusted even slightly. She wrote them carefully, explaining exactly what she needed and why and how quickly, and she did not let herself think about whether they would arrive in time, or whether anyone would respond, or what would happen if they didn't. She mailed them the next morning, and then went back to work, because work was the only thing she could fully control, and she was not going to spend 6 weeks in paralysis. Brooks found out about the claim from Whitfield, which was how everyone in Harlan Creek found out about everything. He rode up to her property that afternoon, and she heard him coming and braced herself, because she knew what was coming, and she had already decided how she was going to handle it. He came through the gate, and she was on the porch, her repaired porch, her own work, and she looked at him straight. I heard about Tate, he said. Word travels. It does. He dismounted, tied the horse to the fence post, and came to the base of the porch steps. He did not come up them, which she noticed. You know who he is. I know what he is, she said. A land speculator running a pressure campaign against someone he thought wouldn't fight back. He's also connected to Judge Harmon in Louisville, Brooks said. And Harmon and Conley have history, which means your case at the hearing is going to need to be airtight. She looked at him. Aldous told you to come talk to me. Aldous mentioned it might be useful. A pause. He wasn't wrong. I have documentation, she said. I have the deed and letters, and I've written to Richmond for the bank records. 6 weeks is tight. I know. The bank in Richmond is slow, yes, I know. I've dealt with them before. She crossed her arms. Not defensively, she was cold. The evening was coming on. She was tired. Mr. Brooks, I understand why you're here, and I appreciate the information about Harmon and Conley. What is it you actually want to say? I was quiet for a moment. I can speak at the hearing, he said, on your behalf. There it was. She had known it was coming, and she had decided how she was going to handle it, and now that it was here, she found to her own considerable annoyance that she did not know what to say. Why? She said. Because Tate is running a fraud, he said simply. And I have enough land and enough standing in this county that I don't need to tolerate fraud from Louisville speculators against my neighbors. Your neighbor, she repeated. That's what this is. What else would it be? She studied him. In the fading evening light he looked tired too. She had not noticed that before, or perhaps she had not let herself notice it. Pearl's words came back to her. He's mostly gone somewhere people can't reach. He did not look gone to her standing at the base of her porch steps in the evening light. He looked like someone who was trying very carefully to be present. If you speak at that hearing, she said slowly, people will talk. They already talk. It'll be, people talk regardless, he said. That's not a reason to make a decision. It could damage your reputation. My reputation is my own to manage. Your relationship with the magistrate. Conley will do the right thing if the case is solid. He's an honest man. He's just also a political man, which means he needs to see the case is solid before he commits. He held her gaze. I can help make it solid. She was quiet. The evening settled around them. She thought about what it had cost her to ask Aldous for help, a man of God with no stakes in the outcome, a former lawyer who had been there waiting to be useful. That had been hard enough. Asking Brooks was different. Brooks was something she didn't have a word for yet, something she had not allowed herself to examine because she was too busy surviving, and examining things that were not useful to immediate survival was a luxury she could not afford. I'll need your help with the documentation review, she said at last. I have the deed and the letters, but I don't know what else Conley will expect from the presentation. I can do that. I'll pay. You will not. Mr. Brooks. Her voice had an edge now that she had not intended. I need to be able to accept help without owing something I can't pay back. Can you understand that? He was quiet for a moment. She thought she had said the wrong thing. Yes, he said. I can understand that. Good. She uncrossed her arms. Then come by Saturday morning. I'll have what documents I have ready, and we can assess what else is needed. Saturday, he said. Early. I work in the afternoon. Something shifted in his face, that fractional recalibration she was starting to recognize, and for just a moment, brief and unguarded, she saw something that looked almost like the beginning of a smile. Early, he agreed. He untied the horse, mounted, and rode west. She stood on her repaired porch and watched him go, and told herself firmly that she was not thinking about anything except the documentation review on Saturday, and the hearing in 6 weeks, and the letters she had sent to Richmond, and the very practical, very concrete problem in front of her. She was almost completely convincing. Saturday came with a hard morning rain that she did not let stop her from being up before dawn, organizing her documents at the kitchen table by the light of 2 candles. She laid everything out in order: the deed, her father's letters that referenced the property and the separate account, a letter from her mother's estate solicitor that she had found tucked in the same drawer as the deed, and had not known was relevant until now. She was reviewing the solicitor's letter for the 3rd time when she heard his horse in the yard. He came to the door at exactly the hour she had meant by early. Not so early, it was presumptuous early enough to be serious. She let him in, which was the first time anyone had come into her house since she had begun to make it into something a person could live in, and she watched him take it in the swept floor. The curtains she had made from the fabric she had hemmed from her second dress. The small things she had accumulated that made the difference between a building and a home. He did not comment on any of it. He went to the table, looked at what she had laid out, and sat down. All right, he said. Show me what you have. They worked through it for 2 hours. He read everything carefully. He asked questions that were precise and specific, the questions of someone who understood how a legal argument was constructed. She answered them the same way, and she watched him recalibrate again and again as she matched or exceeded what he expected. Not with pride, not performing intelligence, just talking about her situation, with the clear-eyed honesty of someone who had no energy left for pretense. The solicitor's letter, he said at one point. This is valuable. This clearly delineates your mother's account from the estate accounts. Tate's whole claim rests on commingling of funds, and this letter disproves it. If we have it authenticated. I know a circuit court recorder who can authenticate it. He glanced up at her. Through legitimate channels, not a favor. Good, she said. At some point, Pearl arrived because apparently she had told Pearl she might be doing some legal work this weekend, and Pearl had appeared with cornbread and the general manner of a woman who had decided to be somewhere whether or not she was specifically invited. Brooks looked at Pearl, and Pearl looked at Brooks, with the mutual acknowledgement of 2 people who have known each other a long time and have no particular opinion to share about it. Still got the gray horse, Pearl said. Still got the laundry, Brooks said. Pearl put the cornbread on the counter and sat in the corner and picked up a mending project she had brought and did not say anything else for an hour. It was, Abigail thought, the most companionable morning she had spent since Virginia. She squashed that thought immediately because it was not a useful thought. "The bank records are the weak point," Brooks said later, when they had been through everything twice. "If they don't arrive before the hearing—" "They'll arrive," she said. He looked at her. "I wrote 3 letters," she said. "I was specific about what I needed and why. Someone will send the records." "You sound sure." "I am sure." She met his eyes. "I have to be sure. It's the only way I know how to do things." He held her gaze for a moment long enough that she was aware of the silence, the rain against the window, Pearl's needle going in and out of cloth in the corner. "That's not a weakness," he said quietly. "I didn't say it was. Some people would." "Some people," she said, "have said a great deal of things about me since I arrived here. I've found it's better not to conduct my life based on their opinions." High made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Not quite, but close enough that Pearl looked up from her mending for a half-second and then looked back down. "No," he said. "I reckon you're right about that." 6 days before the hearing, the bank records arrived from Richmond. They were complete, clearly dated, and contained everything Abigail needed to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that her mother's account had been legally separate, funded entirely by her mother's family before the marriage, and that the property purchase had come from those funds with no connection to her father's estate debts. She read through them at the kitchen table, checking every figure against the deed, against the solicitor's letter, against the notes she and Brooks had built the case around. Then she walked across the pasture to the Brooks property. She had never done that before. She had always waited for him to come to her because he was the one with reasons to ride past, because she was the one with work to do and the farm to manage. She crossed the creek on the stepping stones and walked through the west pasture and arrived at the Brooks farmyard, which was large and orderly and obviously the product of years of serious management. A young hand in the yard told her the boss was in the north barn. She found him there working on some piece of harness with the focused economy of a man who knows the task and does not need to think about it. He looked up when she came through the barn door. "Records came," she said. He went still. All of them. All of them. It's clean, Nathaniel." She used his given name without thinking about it, and neither of them mentioned it. "It's completely clean. There's no case. There never was a case. Tate built this whole thing on the assumption that I wouldn't be able to document the account separation in time." He set down the harness. He looked at her, really looked at her the way he had begun to do in the past weeks. Not the assessing look of the man at the fence line on the first day, but something more direct and less guarded. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. And then, because she was Abigail Carter and she had come this far on nothing but clear-eyed honesty, and she was not about to stop now, she said, "I came to tell you first, before anyone else. I thought you should know first." The silence that followed was not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have too much and know it and are not yet sure what to do with it. "I'll be at the hearing Tuesday," he said finally. "Early." "I know," she said. She turned and walked back out through the barn and across the pasture and over the creek stones, and she did not let herself think about the look on his face when she had said Nathaniel, or what it had felt like to walk to him for the first time instead of waiting for him to come to her, or what Pearl had said about people who were gone somewhere that couldn't be reached. She had a hearing to prepare for. She had a farm to keep. She had everything she had come here to build, and she intended to keep building it, and she was going to do that one solid plank at a time. Nothing else was a plan she could afford right now. She told herself that very firmly. She was almost completely convincing. The morning of the hearing, Abigail woke at 4 o'clock and did not go back to sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the creek and going through the documents in her mind, the way she had been going through them for the past 6 days. The deed, the solicitor's letter, the bank records, the sequence of facts that built into an argument so clean and clear that she could not see how Magistrate Conley could rule against her. She had gone through it with Brooks twice more after the records arrived. She had gone through it alone at the kitchen table at night until the candle burned low. She knew it cold. Knowing it cold did not stop her hands from shaking when she dressed. She put on her best dress, not the second best she had been wearing to town, but the one she had packed at the very bottom of her trunk in Virginia, the dark blue wool that had belonged to a life she no longer lived. She had not worn it since the lawyers came. She put it on now because this was a legal proceeding, and she was going to walk into that courtroom looking like a woman who deserved to be taken seriously, and she was going to make them take her seriously if it was the last thing she did in Harlan County. She pinned her hair. She checked the document case she had made from oilcloth and twine. She fed the hens. She did not eat breakfast because her stomach would not have accepted it. Then she walked to town. Brooks was waiting outside the courthouse, a low wooden building beside the church that served as meeting hall, courtroom, and county records office depending on the day. He was standing with his hat in his hands, which she had never seen him do before. It made him look different. Younger somehow. Less armored. He looked at her when she came up the road, and something moved in his face that she catalogued and set aside, because this was not the moment. "Records," he said. She held up the oilcloth case. "Aldous is inside," he said. "He'll sit with you. I'll be called as a witness when Conley gets to character testimony." "You've done this before," she said. "Once or twice." "On which side?" Something flickered. "The right one," he said. "Always the right one." She believed him. She did not entirely understand why she believed him as readily as she did, only that she had spent enough weeks watching him operate to know that Nathaniel Brooks was a man who made decisions based on what was actually true rather than what was convenient, and that was rarer than it should have been. "All right," she said. "Let's go in." The courtroom held maybe 40 people, and every one of them had turned out for this. She felt them when she walked in the weight of all that attention. Some of it hostile, some of it curious, some of it from Pearl's direction, near the back wall, something closer to fierce loyalty. Mrs. Holt was there. The men from the tavern porch were there. Whitfield was there, standing along the side wall with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral. Gerald Tate was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She had built a picture of him in her mind over the past 6 weeks, and the reality was both more and less than she had imagined. He was in his 50s, well-dressed in the Louisville fashion, with the kind of face that had learned long ago how to look reasonable while being anything but. He had a lawyer with him, a young man with a leather case, and the confident posture of someone who had won cases on procedure before and expected to win this one the same way. Tate looked at her when she came in. She looked back at him without flinching, walked to the defendant's table, set down her oilcloth case, and sat beside Reverend Aldous, who had apparently decided that God's work today included sitting at a defendant's table in a land dispute. "How are you?" he said quietly. "Ready," she said. "Good," he said. "Because Tate's lawyer is going to move to exclude the bank records on technical grounds before Conley even reads them. They filed a procedural objection this morning." Her stomach dropped 2 inches. "On what basis?" she said. "Authentication. They'll claim the records weren't properly certified by the Richmond Bank under Kentucky procedural standards." "But Brooks said he had a circuit court recorder." "He does. The question is whether Conley accepts his recorder's authentication or defers to Tate's objection." Aldous kept his voice level. "Conley's an honest man, but he's also a man who doesn't like procedural complications." She opened the oilcloth case and looked at the documents. All of it. Aldous kept his voice level. "Conley's an honest man, but he's also a man who doesn't like procedural complications." She opened the oilcloth case and looked at the documents. All of it. Everything she had worked for, everything she had written letters and waited 6 weeks and built a legal argument around, and Tate was going to try to throw it out before Conley read a single word. She thought about Virginia. She thought about the lawyers with their cold eyes and their papers. She thought about every person who had looked at her and seen someone who would not fight back. She closed the case. "What do I need to say?" she said. Magistrate Conley was a lean man in his 60s who wore his authority the way serious men do not. Loudly, not as performance, but as a simple fact about himself that he saw no need to announce. He called the proceeding to order, established the nature of the claim, and then immediately turned to Tate's lawyer. "Mr. Ives, I understand you've filed a procedural motion." "Yes, Your Honor." Ives stood with his leather case and his confident posture. The defendant has submitted bank records from Richmond as evidence of account separation. We move to exclude these records on the grounds that they have not been authenticated under Kentucky evidentiary standards, without proper certification from a Kentucky-recognized authority. I certified them. The voice came from the back of the room. Every head turned. Brooks stood in the doorway. He had come in after them, she realized, had stayed outside until this moment, and she understood immediately with a clarity that was almost physical that this was deliberate. He had known about the motion. He had let Ives make it, and then he had walked in. "Mr. Brooks," Conley said with the tone of a man who is not surprised but has decided to hear it out, "I'm the Kentucky Circuit Court Recorder of Record who authenticated those documents." Brooks walked to the front of the room, unhurried. "I certified them under Section 14 of the Kentucky Evidence Act, which provides for authentication by a county officer of record in cases where direct certification from an out-of-state institution is impractical within the required time frame." He stopped and looked at Ives with something that was not quite contempt, too controlled for contempt, but was in the neighborhood. "If Mr. Ives would like to challenge my authority to authenticate, he's welcome to do that in Louisville. That'll take about 6 months, which I suspect is the actual goal of the motion." The room was very quiet. Conley looked at Ives. Ives looked at Tate. Tate looked at Brooks with an expression that was the first honest thing Abigail had seen on his face, pure, undisguised calculation, and behind it, the beginning of something that looked like concern. "The motion is denied," Conley said. "We'll proceed." Abigail let out a breath she had been holding since Aldous said procedural objection. Aldous patted her hand once briefly and said nothing. The case Ives made for Tate was slick. She had to give him that. He had done his research. He had out-of-state documents from Virginia records of the debts correspondence between her father's creditors and the lawyers who had managed the settlement. He built an argument that the Carter property, whatever account it had nominally been purchased from, had functionally been part of the family estate for 14 years, and that the creditors' settlement should have included it. It was a better argument than she had expected. She watched Conley listening and could not read his face, and her hands were still in her lap, and her face was still, and she was not going to show anything to this room, not one thing. Then it was her turn. Aldous presented the deed. He presented the solicitor's letter. He walked Conley through the bank records, every account entry, every dated transaction, every line that showed the account, predating the marriage, predating the debts, predating everything. Tate was claiming to touch. Then he called her to speak. She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She turned and faced Conley, and did not look at the 40 people watching her. "Miss Carter," Aldous said from the table, "in your own words, tell the court what this land means to you." It was a simple question. She had prepared a simple answer. But standing there with the weight of everything, 5 weeks of roof repair and window shutters and chimney caps and turnips and kale and blistered hands and $4 bank accounts, and 3 miles of rough road walked in worn-heeled boots, she found that the simple answer was not the true one. "My mother bought that land," she said. "She bought it with money she brought into her marriage from her own family, before she ever knew my father, before any of his decisions, or his debts, or his ambitions, had anything to do with her. She bought it because she believed in having something that was wholly her own." She paused. "She died when I was 14. She left me very little, but she left me that deed." The room was quiet in a different way now. Not the quiet of people watching a performance. The quiet of people who are listening. "Gerald Tate has never been to that property," she said. "He doesn't know what it looks like, or how far the creek runs, or where the timber stands on the west edge. He has never worked a single hour of its ground. He found a document identified a woman he assumed could not fight back, and filed a fraudulent claim to take what someone else built." She looked at Conley directly. "The documentation is complete and clear. The account is separate. The purchase is unambiguous. I'm asking this court to dismiss the claim and let me go home and get back to work." She sat down. The room exhaled. Conley looked at his papers for a long moment. Then he looked at Tate. "Mr. Tate," he said, "would you like to respond to the account documentation? Tate leaned forward and spoke quietly to Ives. Ives straightened. Your Honor, we maintain that the functional integration of the property into the family estate over 14 years. The documentation shows no functional integration, Conley said, with the flat certainty of a man who has read everything and made up his mind. The account remained separate. The deed remained in the original form. No estate records show this property as a listed asset. Your claim rests entirely on assumption. He closed the folder in front of him. The claim is dismissed. Miss Carter retains full title. The room erupted. Not in applause. This was a courthouse, not a theater. But in the release of 40 people who had been holding a collective breath. A burst of voices movement, the particular sound of a story, reaching a turn that not everyone had predicted. Mrs. Holt made a sound that Abigail chose not to examine. Pearl from the back wall said, "There it is," in the tone of a woman confirming something she had known for a while. Tate stood. His face had done something complicated. The calculation was gone, and what was underneath it was uglier and more honest. He looked at Abigail with the naked fury of a man who had been made to look like a fool in public. "This isn't done," he said, not to Conley, directly to her. The room went quiet again immediately. Brooks was on his feet before the words had finished leaving Tate's mouth. He did not move toward Tate. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood and let the full weight of his presence and his standing in that county settle into the room like a stone into still water. "Yes, it is," he said. Tate looked at him. Brooks looked back. It was the kind of standoff that does not require volume to be absolute. Tate picked up his hat, said something to Ives, and walked out. She did not celebrate because that was not in her nature, but she did accept Pearl's fierce and brief embrace outside the courthouse, and she did shake Aldis's hand for longer than was strictly formal, and she did look at Brooks across the dispersing crowd and say simply, "Thank you." "You built that case," he said. "I handed a document to a recorder. You stood up in that room when Ives made his motion. Someone had to. It didn't have to be you." He looked at her with something she still did not have a full word for. "Yes," he said, "it did." They stood there in the summer noon heat, while Harlan Creek moved around them, and she was aware of her repaired porch waiting 3 miles north, and the hens that needed feeding, and the kale that needed checking after the rain, and all the 10,000 practical things that constituted her life now. She was aware of all of it. She was also aware of him. "Dinner," Pearl said, appearing beside them with the absolute authority of a woman who has decided something and is not interested in arguments. "Both of you. My place. Tonight. I made a proper stew and I'm not eating it alone." Brooks looked at Pearl. Pearl looked at Brooks. "Fine," he said. Pearl looked at Abigail. "Fine," Abigail said. Pearl walked away with the satisfied air of a diplomatic mission accomplished. Dinner at Pearl's was 3 people at a small table. Good stew, and the particular kind of conversation that happens when everyone in the room has stopped performing and is just talking. Aldis joined them halfway through, having apparently also been summoned without his knowledge, and added a 4th chair and a bottle of something he claimed was medicinal. Brooks talked more than she had ever heard him talk. Not about himself. He was not a man who talked about himself, but about the county, about the land, about the way things worked and didn't work in this corner of Kentucky. He knew the history of every farm within 20 miles, could tell you when they had been settled and who had worked them and how they had changed. He talked about it the way people talk about things they love without admitting they love them. She listened and asked questions because she was learning this place and its history, and she wanted to know it the way he knew it. At one point, Aldis said something about a parcel to the east that had been left by a man who died without heirs, and what might become of it. And Brooks said the county was considering it for a schoolhouse, if they could find someone to run it, and Abigail said without thinking, "I could run it," and then caught herself because she hadn't planned to say that, hadn't even known she was thinking it. Everyone at the table looked at her. "I taught in Virginia," she said more carefully. "Before. My father's estate had a school for the children of the workers. I ran it for 4 years." "We haven't had a proper school in this county in 3 years, Aldis said. "The last schoolmistress married and moved to Lexington. "I'm not going to Lexington," Abigail said. A silence. Then Pearl refilled everyone's cups and said, "Well," in the tone of someone watching pieces move into place. Brooks was looking at her. Not with surprise, she had the sense somehow that very little she did surprised him anymore. He was looking at her with that careful, weighted attention that had stopped feeling like assessment weeks ago and started feeling like something she could not let herself name. "The county board meets in October," he said. "If you were interested in making a case for the position." "I'm interested," she said. She said it steadily and looked at the table and told herself that her face was not warm and her heart was not doing anything different from its usual rhythm, and she was simply a practical woman talking about a practical opportunity. She was not entirely convincing. 3 days after the hearing, Tate made his second move. She should have anticipated it. She had heard what he said on his way out, "This isn't done," and she had seen what Brooks's response had meant in that room. She had filed it all away and gone home and fed her hens and checked her kale and thought the thing was finished. It was not finished. What happened was this. She went to Whitfield's store for her weekly supplies, and Whitfield met her at the door with an expression she had not seen on him before. Something cautious and troubled that on a less self-controlled man would have been alarm. "Miss Carter," he said, "there's something you should know." He told her that Tate, before leaving Harlan Creek, had spent an afternoon in the tavern. He had talked, which is what men who have lost something talk when they are angry about losing it. He had said things about the land claim that were expected, and things about Nathaniel Brooks's involvement in it that were somewhat expected. And then he had said things about Abigail Carter herself that were neither expected nor acceptable, specific things, suggesting that her relationship with Brooks was not the neighborly arrangement the county had been allowed to believe. He had said she had traded something for Brooks's testimony. Whitfield did not say it precisely that way. He used softer words with the manner of a man who is deeply uncomfortable having to relay the information at all, and is doing it only because he believes she needs to know. She understood his soft words well enough to know exactly what Tate had said. She stood very still in Whitfield's doorway. "Who heard him?" she said. "Half the tavern," Whitfield said, "which means the whole town by this morning." She looked at the road behind her. People were moving along it a normal Harlan Creek morning. But she noticed now 2 women who did not meet her eyes. A man who turned his head. Small things, the kind that meant a story, had gotten there before her. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Miss Carter." He looked genuinely distressed. "There are people who know it's a lie. There are plenty." "I know," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield." She bought what she needed, took her parcel, and walked home. She walked all 3 miles without stopping, and without letting her face do anything, in case someone was watching from a window or a porch, and she held that composure with both hands the entire way, like a person carrying something fragile over rough ground. When she got inside, she set the parcel on the kitchen table. Then she sat down and let herself be furious. It was not the impotent fury of someone who has no recourse. It was the very specific fury of a woman who has worked for every single thing she has and watched someone try to reduce it to something cheap, not to take her land this time because that was done, but to take something else, something harder to document and harder to defend. Her name, her standing. What she had built here week by week with blistered hands and worn boots and a stubbornness that was the only inheritance she had been able to keep. She sat with that fury until it settled into something cooler and more useful. Then she thought about what to do with it. Brooks arrived before she had decided. She heard him in the yard and went to the door and looked at his face and knew from the set of it that he had already heard. "How long have you known?" she said. "This morning." He dismounted. "Connor at the mill told me." "Come in," she said. He came in and stood in her kitchen, and she could see it on him. Not the cool, controlled composure of the man she had met at the fence line 2 months ago. Something had shifted in the architecture of his expression. He was angry, she realized. Not with her. For her. There was a difference, and she registered it and put it somewhere. "I'm going to go back to the tavern," he said, "and correct the record." "No," she said. "Abigail, no." She was very clear. If you go into that tavern and correct the record, it tells this town that what he said required correction. It gives it weight." He looked at her. "It required correction the moment he said it." "I know that, and you know that," she said. "But you walking into the tavern to defend my honor is a different story than the story I need this town to be telling." "What story do you need this town telling?" "That Abigail Carter won her hearing on the merits of her evidence," she said, "and that Gerald Tate went home to Louisville and his claim against her property died because it had no basis in law, and that what he said in the tavern afterward was the talk of a man who lost and knew it. That story tells itself if we let it." He was quiet for a long moment. "He hurt you," he said. "It was very simple." "Yes," she said. "He did. And you're going to—" He stopped. "You're going to let it sit there." "I'm going to let it die of neglect," she said, "which is faster." He looked at her with that weighted attention, and she saw something in his face that she had not allowed herself to see before, because she had been too careful and too busy and too determined not to complicate what was already complicated enough. He was not looking at her like a neighbor. He had not been looking at her like a neighbor for a while, and they both knew it, and neither of them had said it, because there were 100 reasons not to say it, and she had been holding all of them very carefully in place. "Nathaniel," she said. She used his name deliberately the way she had that afternoon in the barn, and watched him notice it. "What Tate said. It can't affect what you do next. It cannot be the thing that makes you do something. Do you understand me?" "I'm not sure I do," he said. "If you do something now, if you go to that tavern, if you say something to the county board, if you do anything that can be read as defending me, it confirms his story. It makes it real. And I have spent 2 months building something here that I refuse to let him make into what he said it was." She held his gaze. "What I will not do," she said more quietly, "is pretend that what he said doesn't matter to me, because it does. Not because it's true. Because it took something that is real and made it into something ugly and real. Things deserve better than that." The silence was long and very full. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and took her hands. He did it with the same directness he brought to everything, no performance, no preamble, just the fact of it. She looked down at his hands over hers. Her blistered, calloused, work-roughened hands. His hands which were the same. "What he said," Brooks said quietly, "has nothing to do with what I think, or what I've seen, or what I've watched you build here from nothing with your own 2 hands. He paused. "What I think is—" "Don't," she said. "Abigail, not now." She did not pull her hands away. "Not while this is still in the air. When it's done. When I'm standing on the other side of it, and it died the way I said it would. Then—" She stopped. "Then," he said. She looked up at him. "Then we can have a different conversation," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she felt the full weight of everything that was in that pause, the months behind them, and the ground they had covered together, and all the things that had been said in the space between the things they said, and she waited. "All right," he said. He let go of her hands. He stepped back. "All right," he said again. "I'll wait." She nodded. He went to the door. Stopped. "For the record," he said without turning around. "The story I'd tell about you, if I were telling it, wouldn't be what Tate said. It would be about a woman who got up on a roof she'd never been on before and fixed what was broken. And kept fixing it, until she had something worth having." He opened the door and left. She stood in her kitchen and listened to him ride away, and the creek ran behind the house and the hens were quiet in the yard. And somewhere in Harlan Creek, a man named Tate was telling a story that was going to die because she was going to outlast it. She put the kettle on. She had work to do. Tate's story did die. It took 11 days, which was 11 days longer than she would have preferred, but it died the way she had said it would, of neglect of the weight of the evidence against it, of the visible and undeniable fact that Abigail Carter kept showing up to Whitfield's store and Pearl's laundry, and Reverend Aldis's Sunday service, with her spine straight, and her accounts settled, and her property thriving, and that none of those things looked like a woman who had compromised herself for anything. It helped that Pearl talked. Pearl did not defend Abigail loudly or dramatically. That was not Pearl's way. Pearl simply mentioned to the women who brought their washing that she had been present on the Saturday morning when Brooks and Abigail had reviewed the legal documents, and that what she had witnessed was two people working on a court case and nothing else, and that anyone who believed Gerald Tate over their own eyes was welcome to explain why a Louisville land speculator's tavern grievances were more reliable than Pearl's 30 years of watching this county conduct itself. Nobody wanted to explain that to Pearl. It helped that Whitfield, who was not a man given to speeches, told two people quietly and specifically that he had watched Abigail Carter walk into his store for 2 months and conduct herself with more dignity than half the county combined, and that he had no patience for what was being said. It helped that Brooks did exactly what she had asked him to do. He said nothing. He went about his business. He did not ride past her property more or less than he had before. He did not appear at the tavern. He did not make any gesture that could be read as confirmation or denial of anything. He behaved like a man who had nothing to prove because he didn't, and that steadiness spoke louder than any tavern conversation. By the 11th day, Mrs. Holt had moved on to someone else's business, which was the surest sign the thing was finished. Abigail knew it was finished on a Tuesday morning when she walked to town for her supplies, and 3 women who had not met her eyes the week before met them now, and one of them, a young woman named Sadie, whose husband worked the mill, stopped her on the road and said simply, "I heard about the hearing. Good for you," and walked on. 2 words. Good for you. She held them the entire way home. The conversation she had promised Brooks did not happen immediately. This was partly her doing, and partly circumstance, and partly the particular difficulty of 2 stubborn people who have agreed that something will happen but are each waiting for the moment to be right, and neither one willing to force it. October arrived, and with it the county board meeting about the schoolhouse position. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for it, the way she prepared for everything methodically, thoroughly, without allowing herself to think about what it would mean if it didn't go well. She had written a proposal, a 6-month trial curriculum, a cost structure and enrollment plan based on the families she had met in the county, references from her time teaching in Virginia that she had requested and received from 2 former students' families who still held her in good account despite the collapse of everything else. She presented it to the board, 5 men, 3 of whom she recognized, and 2 she did not, in the same room where she had won her hearing 2 months before. The room felt different this time, less hostile, or perhaps she was less afraid of it. Conley was on the board. He listened with the same attentive expression he had brought to the hearing. Brooks was not on the board. He was in the back of the room, which she noticed and did not acknowledge. She spoke for 20 minutes. She answered their questions directly without hedging. When one of them she did not recognize asked whether she thought a single woman could manage a schoolroom of mixed ages without assistance, she said yes, and explained exactly how, and did not apologize for the confidence of the answer. When she was done, they asked her to wait outside. She waited on the step for 14 minutes. She counted them. When Conley opened the door, he was almost smiling. "Miss Carter, the board would like to offer you the position," she said. "Thank you," in a voice that was steady, shook his hand, shook the other hands, thanked them, and walked out. Brooks was waiting by the fence. "Well," he said. "I start in November," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come have supper." It was not a question exactly. It was the tone of a man who has been waiting a specific amount of time for a specific conversation and has decided the moment is right. She looked at him. "All right," she said. Supper at the Brooks house was the first time she had been inside it, and what struck her was not the size of it, which was considerable, but how little of it felt lived in. The kitchen was functional. The main room had good furniture that had clearly been good furniture once and had since become a place where a person sat alone. There were no curtains. There was nothing on the walls. It was the house of a man who had decided at some point that comfort was not something he was entitled to anymore. She thought about Pearl's words. "He's mostly gone somewhere people can't reach." She sat at his table and ate the supper he made, which was plain and good. He was a competent cook, the way he was competent at everything, without flourish, and they talked about the school, about the county, about the winter coming, about a dozen practical things that were not the conversation. Then the practical things ran out. He poured the last of the coffee and set the pot down and looked at her across the table. "You said when it was done," he said. "I know what I said. It's done." "I know." He waited. She had thought about this conversation many times over the past 2 months, in the early morning before the hens needed feeding and the late night before she could sleep. She had thought about what she wanted to say and how to say it, and what she was afraid of and what she wasn't. She had organized it the way she organized everything, methodically, clearly, with a plan. The plan dissolved when she looked at his face. "I'm afraid," she said. It was not what she had planned to say first. It was the truest thing, so it came out first. He did not rush to reassure her. She appreciated that. "Of what?" he said. "Of needing someone," she said. "I spent 2 months proving I didn't need anyone. It was the most important thing I'd ever done. And now?" She stopped. "I don't know how to want something and also stand on my own ground at the same time. I don't know if those two things can exist together." "They can," he said. "You sound sure." "I'm not," he said. "But I think they can. I think the wanting is only a problem if one person uses it to pull the other off their ground." He held her gaze. "I have no interest in pulling you off your ground, Abigail. I have been watching you stand on it for 2 months, and it's the most—" He stopped, set down his cup. "It's the most compelling thing I've seen in a very long time." Her chest did something she did not have words for. "Pearl told me about your wife," she said, "and your son." He was quiet for a moment. "I know she did. I'm not asking you to, I'm not trying to—" "I know," he said. "You're not trying to replace them, I know that." He looked at the table. "For a long time after I thought the only way to honor them was to stop wanting anything. Stop hoping for anything. I got very good at it." He looked up. "And then a wagon stopped on the road outside my west pasture, and a woman got off it with a leather trunk and a deed, and walked toward a falling down house like she was walking toward a kingdom." Abigail laughed. It came out before she could stop it. Not a polite laugh, a real one surprised out of her. His whole face changed when she laughed. Something in it came back from wherever it had been. "I watched you get on that roof," he said. "I didn't tell you that. I watched you from the west fence the first morning. I should have ridden on. I told myself to ride on." He shook his head slightly. "I couldn't." "Why didn't you say something?" "Because you were busy not needing anyone," he said, "and I was not going to be the person who interrupted that." She looked at him across the table. This man who had known loss, the kind she hadn't, who had gone somewhere people couldn't reach and had apparently started coming back without announcing it, who had shown up at every moment that mattered, with the right information and the right silence and the right steadiness, and had never once tried to make her smaller. "I'm still going to be difficult," she said. "I know. I'm going to disagree with you. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. I'm not going to give up the property. I would never ask you to. Or the school. Abigail." His voice was very quiet. "I know who you are. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking—" He stopped, started again. "I'm asking if there's room, on your ground, for one more person who plans to stay." The kitchen was quiet. She felt the full weight of what he was asking, and what it would mean to say yes, and what she stood to lose if she was wrong about him. And she also felt underneath all of that, steadier than all of that she was not wrong about him. She had been watching him as long as he had been watching her, and she knew what she saw. "There's room," she said. What changed after that evening was not everything at once. It was not a sudden unlocking of things long held closed. It was slower and more honest than that, the kind of change that happens between two people who are both in their separate ways unused to being met, and who proceed carefully because they have both lost enough to know the value of careful. He came to her property on Saturdays as he had before, but now the purpose was acknowledged rather than dressed as practicality. He helped her plan the school space, which the county was converting from the old East Barn on the Aldous parcel, and she watched him work with the same economy and competence he brought to everything, and felt something that was not complicated at all, just warm. She went to his house on Wednesdays for supper. She brought things: a pot of soup, a loaf of bread, the kale that kept coming even into October with unreasonable abundance. She noticed gradually that the house was changing. A curtain appeared in the kitchen window. A second chair was pulled closer to the fire. Small things. The kind that meant a person was starting to think about more than just themselves. She did not comment on them. He did not explain them. They both understood. Pearl watched all of this with the satisfaction of a woman who has seen a thing coming from a significant distance and is pleased to have been right. She said nothing, which was its own form of eloquence. Then 4 weeks after the supper at his house, the third thing happened. And it was the one she had not planned for. She was in town at the general store when she heard the horses. More than one. Coming from the South Road, the Louisville direction, moving fast. She did not think anything of it until she stepped out of Whitfield's and saw them pull up in the town square, 2 horses, 2 men and a woman. The woman was perhaps 50, with the bearing and dress of someone from a city, from money, from a world where how you looked was how you were judged. She had Brooks's eyes. That was the first thing Abigail registered, the same dark assessing eyes. But where his had learned to wait, hers moved immediately, and with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions quickly. The 2 men with her were younger. One clearly a lawyer by his case and his posture, one who carried himself like family. They were looking at the Brooks property when Abigail first saw them. They were asking someone in the square for directions. She went to Pearl's. "Who is that?" she said. Pearl looked out her window. Pearl's expression went through several things in quick succession and settled on careful. "That," she said, "is Margaret Brooks, Nathaniel's mother. She lives in Louisville." She paused. "She comes once a year usually. Always finds something to have an opinion about." "And the men with her?" "The young one is his cousin Thomas. The other one I don't recognize." Pearl paused. "Abigail." "I know," Abigail said. "She's going to have opinions. I know that too." She went home. He came to her that evening, and she could see it in how he held himself when he came through the gate. Something tightened the careful man she had met at the fence line in July briefly, back over the top of the person he had been becoming. "You saw them," he said. "In the square." He came onto the porch, stood beside her, did not sit, which was unusual. "My mother has heard," he said. "About the hearing. About," he stopped, "about us." "How?" "Louisville isn't as far from Harlan Creek as it should be." He was looking at the pasture, not at her. "She wants to meet you." "All right," Abigail said. He looked at her then. "You understand what that means?" "I understand what it probably means," she said. "She's come to assess the situation and manage it if she can. She's not—" He stopped, tried again. "She cared about Margaret, my wife. They were close. After Margaret and James died, she decided the best thing she could do was—" He paused. "Make sure nothing like that happened again." "By which she means nothing at all. By which she means keeping me safe by keeping me sealed." His voice was flat. "She'll be polite. She's always polite. But she'll have information about your father's debts, about the estate collapse in Virginia, about whatever she could find. She will use it the way Tate used it, except she'll do it with better manners, and she'll believe she's doing it for the right reasons." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "When?" she said. "She wants to come Friday." "Here." He looked slightly pained. "She asked to receive you at the house, which is her way of establishing the ground," Abigail said. "Of making sure she's on hers, and I'm on hers." "Yes." She thought about it. "I'll go," she said. "Abigail, I'll go. But I'll go as myself. I won't perform anything. I won't apologize for anything. If she has questions about my father's estate or my circumstances, I'll answer them honestly because I have nothing to hide and I'm not ashamed of anything I've done." She looked at him directly. "And I need you to let me handle it." She can be— "I know, let me handle it." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. But there was something in his face that worried her. Not doubt, but the particular tension of a man who has been managed by someone for a long time and is not entirely sure he can hold the line. Friday came cold and clear, the first real cold of the season. She put on the dark blue dress again. She walked to his house and knocked on the door like a guest, which she was, and the door was opened by the cousin Thomas, who looked her up and down with the frank assessment of a young man who has been briefed and is forming his own opinion. "Miss Carter," he said, and had the good manners to offer his hand. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and shook it. Margaret Brooks was in the main room, and the first thing Abigail noticed was that she had put curtains up. Different curtains, finer ones brought from Louisville, put up over the ones that had appeared in the past few weeks. It was such a precise act of reclamation that Abigail almost admired the efficiency of it. Nathaniel was standing by the fire. He looked at her when she came in with an expression that said several things simultaneously, most of which translated to, "I'm sorry, and I'm here, and please be careful." Margaret Brooks was gracious. Completely, fluently, entirely gracious, which was exactly what Abigail had expected, and was in some ways harder to navigate than outright hostility. "Miss Carter." She gestured to a chair. The wrong chair. Abigail noticed not the one nearest the fire, but the one with its back to the door, the subordinate position. "Do sit down. Nathaniel has told me a great deal about your situation." "Has he?" Abigail said, and sat in the chair nearest the fire instead, calmly, and without making anything of it. A brief pause. Margaret recalibrated. "Your father's estate," she said, settling across from her. "A difficult business. I understand there were significant debts." "There were," Abigail said. "They've been settled. The property I hold here was separate from the estate accounts, as was established at the county hearing in August." "Yes, I heard about the hearing." A slight pause. "Nathaniel was very involved. He authenticated documents through the circuit court recorder's process. It was a legal procedure, of course." Margaret's smile did not change. "He's always been generous, perhaps too generous sometimes with people who—" She paused as though choosing her word with care. "Who find themselves in difficult circumstances." The room was very quiet. Nathaniel's hands, Abigail noticed, had tightened at his sides. "Mrs. Brooks," Abigail said. Her voice was pleasant. It was not warm. "I think we understand each other well enough to be direct. You've come because you're concerned about your son's judgment. That's a mother's right. But I want to be clear about something." She held the older woman's gaze steadily. "I didn't come to Kentucky looking for a wealthy neighbor to resolve my problems. I came with a deed and $12, and I rebuilt a property that had been going to ruin for 6 years, using my own work and my own planning. I won a fraudulent legal claim on the strength of documentation I gathered myself. I've been appointed to run the county school starting in November. And I am here in this house at your son's invitation, not because I need anything from him or from you, but because I respect him. That's the situation as it actually is. Now, if you have questions about any part of it, I'll answer them honestly." The silence stretched. Thomas, from his position near the doorway, made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly suppressed. Margaret looked at her. The gracious smile had not moved. But something behind it had shifted the first genuine assessment, the social performance giving way briefly to the real woman underneath. "You taught school in Virginia," Margaret said. 4 years. "And the property 40 acres of bottomland, with creek access. Currently producing a kitchen garden and 3 hens. I have plans for expansion in the spring." "Plans," Margaret repeated. "I tend to make them," Abigail said, "and carry them through." Another silence. Margaret looked at her son. Something passed between them, old and complicated, and not fully visible to anyone else in the room. Then she looked back at Abigail. "Tea," she said, which was not a question, and called toward the kitchen. The afternoon was not warm. It was not a surrender. But it was something. A negotiation conducted entirely in the language of politeness, with both participants fully aware of what was being negotiated. Margaret asked about Virginia, about the school, about the curriculum she was planning. She asked with genuine interest once the performance of assessment had concluded, and Abigail realized slowly that beneath the Louisville manners and the maternal protectiveness, Margaret Brooks was an intelligent woman who had spent a long time making sure her son did not have the space to hurt himself again. She was not malicious, She was afraid. Abigail understood being afraid. She did not soften what she had said. But when Margaret asked near the end of the afternoon, "What do you want, Miss Carter, truly?" she answered honestly. "I want to teach the children of this county to read and reason," she said. "I want my farm to be productive enough to support itself by spring. I want my mother's land to be what she bought it to be, something wholly my own that no one can take." She paused. "And I want to stop doing everything alone. I'm very good at it. I'm tired of it." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "That," she said quietly, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." She left the next morning with Thomas and the lawyer. She embraced Nathaniel at the door, brief the embrace of a woman who shows affection in small, controlled amounts. She nodded to Abigail across the yard. Abigail nodded back. It was not approval. It was not disapproval. It was the beginning of a woman deciding what she thought, which was more than Abigail had expected to get. The night Margaret left, Brooks came to Abigail's property after supper. She heard him coming and came out to the porch and looked at him in the October dark, and he stood at the base of her steps and looked at her, and she thought, he is going to say something that matters, and he is gathering himself to say it. "She isn't wrong," he said, to be careful. "I know," Abigail said. "After Margaret, after James." He stopped. "I put everything behind walls, every wanting, every hoping. I built it very solid. I was proud of how solid it was." He looked at his hands briefly. "And then I had to watch you take apart a falling down house and rebuild it better than it was, and I started thinking about walls differently." She waited. "I'm not behind them the same way," he said. "I need you to know that. I'm not choosing you from behind a wall. I'm choosing you—" He stopped. "I'm choosing you. Full stop. Nothing else." She came down the steps. She stood in front of him and looked up at him in the October cold and said, "I know." "You know," he repeated. "I've been watching you as long as you've been watching me," she said. "Did you think I hadn't noticed?" Something broke open in his face. He cupped her face in both his hands and kissed her. Not carefully. Not with the tentativeness of a man who is still behind walls. With the full and present certainty of a man who has made a decision and is standing completely in it. She kissed him back the same way, with both hands gripping the front of his coat, because she was not a woman who did things halfway. When they separated, they stood there in the cold, with their foreheads almost touching, and the creek ran behind the house, and the stars were very clear, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, because the moment did not need words. Then she said, "You have no curtains in half your house." He pulled back enough to look at her. "My mother put some up," he said. "She took yours down first." A pause. "I noticed," he said. "I'll bring some from my house," she said. "When I have time. I made them myself, so they aren't fine, but they keep the draft out." He looked at her, the whole complicated, quiet look that meant too many things to name. "All right," he said. She stepped back. She was cold, and there was supper washing up to do, and a lesson plan for November that still needed 3 more hours of work, and she had never in her life been the kind of woman who stood in the cold at night, indefinitely, when there were practical things needing doing. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. He didn't move to leave. "Nathaniel." "I'm going," he said. He was almost smiling. "I'm just going slowly." She went inside and shut the door and leaned against it in the dark, and the smile she had been keeping off her face came out and stayed for a while. Then she lit the candle, sat at the table, and opened her lesson plan. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. The difference was that now, when she finally laid it down for the night, there was something waiting on the other side of it that was not just the next morning's work. That was new. She was cautiously, and with full awareness of all it might cost her, glad of it. The school opened on the 3rd Monday of November, and 9 children came. She had expected 6. She had planned for 6, built her lesson structure around 6, arranged the borrowed desks and the reclaimed chalkboard, and the small supply of paper and chalk she had budgeted for with the precision of a woman who knew the difference between what she wanted and what she could afford. 9 came through the door that first morning, ranging from a girl of 5, who held her older brother's hand, and looked at the chalkboard like it was something sacred to a boy of 13 who had been told by his father to come and had clearly not yet decided whether he agreed with his father's judgment. She stood at the front of the room and looked at all 9 of them. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Miss Carter. You are here because someone in your family believes you deserve to learn things. I agree with them, so let's not waste the morning." The 13-year-old, whose name was Caleb, looked up from his deliberate study of the desk surface. Something in her tone had caught him. Good, she thought. That was the one she needed to catch first. By noon, she had all 9 of them working. By the end of the week, she had Caleb staying 20 minutes after the others to work on arithmetic that he had decided somewhere in those first 5 days he actually wanted to understand. She did not make anything of it. She simply answered his questions until he had the answers and sent him home. This was what she had been made for. She understood that now in a way she had not understood it in Virginia, where the teaching had been something she did because it was useful and good, not something that felt like it had been waiting specifically for her. Here in this converted barn at the edge of Harlan County, with 9 children who had never had a proper school and a chalkboard that listed slightly to the left, it felt like the thing that had always been coming. She told Brooks about Caleb one Wednesday evening at his table, and he listened with the full attention he brought to things that mattered and said, "His father thinks he'll be a farmer like him. Caleb's been arguing about it since he was 10. He'll be whatever he decides to be," Abigail said, "if someone gives him the tools first." Brooks looked at her across the table and said nothing, but the look said enough. November settled into a rhythm she had not expected to find so quickly. The school in the mornings, the farm in the afternoons, Wednesdays at his house, Saturdays at hers, and the slowly accumulating weight of a life that was taking on the shape of something real and lasting. She was 3 weeks into the school term when Tate came back. She heard about it from Pearl first, because Pearl heard about everything first, and had the practical instinct to get information to the people who needed it before it could do any damage. Pearl came to the school at the end of a Wednesday morning, waited for the children to file out, and sat on the edge of Caleb's desk with the manner of someone delivering news that requires a particular quality of listener. "Tate's back," she said. Abigail set down her chalk. "When?" "Yesterday. He's not staying at the tavern this time. He's at the Holt house." Pearl let that land. "Margaret Holt is hosting him." Abigail thought about Mrs. Holt with her basket and her smooth civic smile, and the particular pleasure she had taken in Abigail's difficulties from the first day on the road. "Why?" she said. "Because Holt's husband has a parcel adjacent to yours on the east side," Pearl said. "And Tate has been in Louisville for 2 months, and nobody who loses a land claim the way he lost his comes back for social visits." Abigail was very still. "He can't touch my deed," she said. Conley dismissed the claim with prejudice. "It's finished legally." "Your deed is safe," Pearl said. "That's not what worries me." "Then what does?" Pearl looked at her. "He's been talking to the county board." Abigail's hand, resting on the edge of the desk, went flat and still. "About the school," Pearl said. She went to Aldous that afternoon. He confirmed it within 20 minutes of conversation, because Aldous was on the county board and had been in the room when Tate's lawyer, the same young man with the leather case, had come to make representations on his client's behalf. The representations were subtle and carefully structured concerns about the suitability of a woman with no family establishment, no permanent household standing, and a history of legal dispute to be entrusted with the education of county children. No direct accusation. Nothing that could be cleanly refuted. Just the accumulated suggestion that perhaps the board had been hasty, perhaps the situation bore another look. "What did the board say?" Abigail said. "Conley held the line," Aldous said. "He said the appointment was made on merit, and he saw no basis for reconsideration. But 2 of the other members are less certain. Harmon, the one who has history with Conley, apparently has a cousin on the board who I did not know about until today, and that cousin was willing to listen to Tate's lawyer. How much time do I have?" "They'll take it up formally at the December meeting. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The same interval as the land claim hearing." Tate had learned something from the first attempt he had started earlier this time, given himself more room to maneuver, chosen a target that was harder to defend with documents alone. Because you could not document a school the way you could document a bank account. You could not produce a paper that said this woman is good at this, and the children are learning, and the county is better for it. You could produce evidence, and she intended to. But evidence of teaching was different from evidence of property. It lived in the room and the children and Caleb staying 20 minutes late to understand his numbers. She walked home and thought. By the time she reached her property, she knew what she was going to do. She was going to let the children speak. Brooks came that evening, which was not Wednesday, which meant he had heard. She was at the kitchen table with paper and her pen, and she looked up when he came in and saw his face and said, "I know." "Pearl," he said. "And Aldous." He sat across from her. He looked at the paper. "What are you writing?" "Letters," she said. "To the families of my students. I'm asking them to come to the December board meeting. Not to speak against Tate, that's not what this needs. I'm asking them to come and bring their children and let the board look at them and decide for themselves whether 3 weeks of school has made a difference." He was quiet. "Will they come?" she said. "Do you know these families well enough to tell me honestly whether they'll come?" "The Hendersons will come," he said immediately. "Their girl Clara has been telling her mother every night what she learned that day. I heard it from Tom Henderson myself." He thought. "The Mill family, Sadie's children, they'll come. Sadie has told half the county the school's the best thing to happen here in 10 years. He paused. "Caleb's father is harder. He's not convinced the school is worth the time away from the farm." "Then I need to talk to Caleb's father. Daniel Marsh is not an easy man to talk to." "I'm not an easy woman to refuse," she said. Something moved in his face. That thing she had stopped pretending she didn't see. The warmth he had stopped hiding that arrived now without the weight it had carried in the early months. "No," he said. "You are not." "There's something else," she said. She set down the pen. "Tate isn't just coming after the school. He's coming after what the school represents. If he can make the board pull the appointment, he puts it about that Harlan County reviewed my situation and found it wanting. He doesn't need to touch the deed. He touches my standing instead, and the deed becomes a piece of paper a woman of no standing holds on to, with no community behind her." Brooks was very still. "He's trying to isolate you," he said. "Yes." "Then we don't let him." "No," she said. "We don't." The next morning, she walked to the Marsh farm, which was 4 miles east and uphill, and arrived before Daniel Marsh had finished his breakfast, which was intentional. A man at his own table interrupted by a woman arriving at his door at an hour when he has not yet built his defenses for the day is more accessible than the same man 2 hours later with his opinions fully formed. He came to the door with a piece of cornbread in his hand and looked at her with the wariness of a man who has heard various things about various people and is sorting her into a category. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I'm Abigail Carter, Caleb's teacher. I'd like to talk to you about your son." He looked at her. He looked at the cornbread. He stepped back from the door. She went in. They sat at his table, and she talked to him about Caleb specifically, concretely, not in the language of a teacher, performing enthusiasm for a parent, but in the plain language of someone who had watched a boy discover that his mind worked in a particular way and had found it remarkable. She told him about the arithmetic. She told him that Caleb had a capacity for abstract reasoning that was unusual and would be genuinely wasted on farm work alone, which she said without softening it, because Marsh was a man who would respect the unsoftened version more than the careful one. Marsh listened. He ate his cornbread. He did not say anything for a long time. "He's a good worker," he said finally. "Caleb, I need him." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to give him up. I'm asking you to come to the board meeting in December and let them see that this school has value. Because someone is trying to take it away, and the only argument I have that they can't counter with paper is the children themselves." Marsh looked at her. "Who's trying to take it?" he said. "A man named Gerald Tate, a Louisville speculator who lost a land claim against me in August and came back to find a different angle." "I heard about that," Marsh said. He was quiet for a moment. My father couldn't read, he said. Died not being able to read. I learned late from a circuit preacher who came through twice a year. He stopped. It's not what I want for Caleb. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. Another long silence. We'll be there, Marsh said. So, she wrote the letters and sent them. She went to 2 more families in person. She prepared for the December meeting. The way she had prepared for the August hearing methodically, without panic, with the clear-eyed discipline of someone who has learned that preparation is the only kind of prayer that reliably works. And then 10 days before the meeting, the second twist came from a direction she had not seen. It came from Louisville. It came in a letter delivered to Brooks, not to her, which was the first thing that was wrong about it. She knew about the letter because he came to her that evening and sat at her kitchen table and put it down in front of her without saying anything, and she read it. It was from Margaret Brooks. It was 2 pages written in the careful hand of a woman who had been composing correspondence for 50 years and knew exactly how much weight each word carried. The first page was about Nathaniel, about her concerns, her hopes for him, the long years she had watched him manage his grief, the way she had tried to protect him from further harm. It was honest, and it was tender, and it was the most human she had sounded to Abigail in any form. The second page was about Abigail. Margaret had made inquiries. That was how she put it. I have made certain inquiries which I hope you will understand were made from love and not from malice. The inquiries had led her to Gerald Tate's lawyer in Louisville, who had been happy to share certain representations about Abigail Carter's history, her father's debts, her time in Virginia, the events of the past summer. And Margaret had found, she wrote, that she was not fully at ease. Not with the claim itself. She accepted that the legal matter was settled, but with the pattern. A woman who arrives with nothing, who is immediately embroiled in legal conflict, who draws Nathaniel into that conflict, who secures a county appointment. She did not say it directly, but the shape of the paragraph said it clearly. It looked to Margaret's Louisville eyes like a woman who was very good at acquiring things. She was asking Nathaniel to wait, to take more time, to be certain. Abigail finished the letter. She set it on the table. She was very quiet for a moment. She went to Tate's lawyer, she said. Yes. And believed what she heard. He stopped. She didn't want to believe it. I think she wanted to be wrong. But she's afraid, Abigail, and afraid people reach for the evidence that justifies their fear. She looked at the letter on the table. What did you tell her? She said. I haven't answered yet. He held her gaze. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because this affects you, he said. Because I'm not going to write a response to my mother without knowing what you want me to say. She stood up and went to the window and looked out at the November dark, and she thought about everything the letter contained, and everything it meant, and what it cost her to have Tate still reaching her through people she could not entirely fault for being reached. She's not wrong that I arrived with nothing, she said. She's not wrong that I was immediately in conflict. She's not wrong that I drew you into it. She turned around. Those are facts. The interpretation she put on them is not fact, but the facts are real. I know the facts, he said. I was there for all of them. Then you know what your answer should be. He looked at her. Tell me what you need from this. I don't need anything from your letter, she said. I need you to write it honestly. Tell her the truth as you know it. Tell her what you've seen. Don't defend me. She raised a hand when he started to speak. Don't defend me, Nathaniel. Tell the truth. If the truth defends me, then it defends me. If it doesn't, then she's right, and we should know that now. He was quiet for a long time. The truth defends you, he said. Then write it, she said. He did. He sat at her kitchen table and wrote the letter to his mother, 4 pages in his direct, unornamented hand, and she sat across from him and worked on lesson plans for next week's school, and neither of them spoke much, and the fire in the kitchen stove kept them both warm, and at one point their hands were both resting on the table, and his moved and covered hers briefly, and she turned her hand over and held on for a moment before releasing it and going back to her papers. The letter went to Louisville the next morning. The county board met on the first Tuesday of December. The room was fuller than it had been in August. She felt it when she walked in, not the watchful, skeptical crowd of the hearing, but something different. Families. The Henderson family in the third row. Clara sitting between her parents with her hands folded and her back straight. The Mill family. 4 children in a line. The oldest one grinning at Abigail when she walked past. Caleb Marsh in the back row beside his father, who was sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his presence absolute. Pearl was there. Aldous was there. Whitfield was there, standing against the wall. Again, arms folded again, expression carefully neutral again. Except that this time she caught his eye, and he gave her one very deliberate nod. Tate was there. His lawyer was there. Mrs. Holt was there with her basket because she went everywhere. Nathaniel was in the back of the room. She did not look at him. She sat at the front and faced the board and waited. Conley opened the proceedings. He was brief and factual. A request for reconsideration of the school appointment had been brought forward. The board would hear the concerns and the response and make a determination. Tate's lawyer stood first. Howe was smoother this time. He had refined the argument. He did not attack Abigail directly. He was too clever for that, having seen what direct attack produced in August. Instead, he built a picture of instability, the legal history, the disputed circumstances, the concerns about permanence and establishment. He was very careful never to say anything specific enough to be refuted. Then Conley looked at Abigail and said, "Miss Carter." She stood. She had prepared remarks. She set them on the table in front of her, and then she did not look at them because what she was about to say did not come from preparation. "Caleb Marsh," she said, "can you stand up, please?" A beat of silence. A rustle from the back. Caleb stood his father beside him, which she had not asked for, but was grateful for. "Caleb came to school 3 weeks ago," she said to the board to the room. "He told me on the first day without being asked that he reckoned school was probably useless. He said it the way a boy says something he has heard from someone he respects and is trying to believe." She looked at Caleb steadily. Last Thursday, he stayed 40 minutes past the end of school to work through a problem in long division that he had gotten wrong twice and was not willing to leave wrong. Caleb's jaw moved slightly. He did not look away. "Clara Henderson," she said. "Will you stand?" Clara stood. She was 6. Clara could not read her own name when she came through that door 3 weeks ago, Abigail said. She can read 12 words now. She told her mother she wants to read a whole book before spring. She paused. Clara is 6 years old. She looked at the board at Conley, at the 2 uncertain members at the Harmon cousin, who had been willing to listen to Tate. "Gerald Tate has never been inside that schoolroom," she said. "He does not know those children's names. He has no idea what is happening in that room 3 mornings a week, and he does not care, because what happens in that room has nothing to do with what he came back to Harlan County to accomplish." She let that sit for a moment. "I am not going to stand here and defend my character against a man who has twice tried to take something from me and twice been wrong about my willingness to fight for it. I'm going to ask you to look at this room. Look at who came today, and ask yourselves what it means that these families are here." She sat down. The room was very quiet. Conley looked at the families. He looked at Tate. He looked at his notes. Then the Harmon cousin. The uncertain one, the one who had listened to Tate's lawyer, spoke. She had not expected him to speak first. His name was Howard, and he was in his 40s, and she had not been able to read him. "I have a question for the lawyer," Howard said. Tate's lawyer straightened. "Has your client," Howard said, "at any point visited the school your client wishes to see closed?" A pause. "That's not," the lawyer began. "It's a yes or no question," Howard said. Another pause. "No," the lawyer said. Howard nodded once. He looked at Conley. He did not say anything else. Conley looked at his board. He looked at the room. He looked at Abigail. "The appointment stands," he said. "This matter is closed." The room came apart in the way rooms come apart when a decision lands the way people were hoping. Not loud, this was December in Kentucky, and these were not theatrical people, but full. The Henderson parents leaned together. Pearl said, "There it is," for the second time in 4 months, with exactly the same tone. Caleb Marsh sat down and looked at his desk, and then looked up at Abigail with an expression she was going to remember for a long time. His father put a hand on his shoulder, brief and hard, and Caleb straightened under it. Tate left without looking at her, which she supposed was its own form of acknowledgement. She was speaking to the Henderson parents when Brooks reached her. The room was thinning out around them, people collecting coats and children voices, warm with the particular relief of a winter morning that has turned out better than it might have. He stopped beside her and waited for her to finish her conversation, because he was not a man who interrupted things. When the Hendersons moved away, he looked at her and said, "Caleb Marsh." "I know," she said. "That was—" He stopped. "Abigail, that was remarkable." "It was honest," she said. "I found that's usually the same thing." He looked at her with the full, unguarded attention she had learned in the past months was the truest thing about him. The way he looked when he had stopped managing himself and was simply present completely in the moment and the person in front of him. "My mother wrote back," he said. She went still. He reached into his coat and took out a letter. He held it out. She took it. She read it. It was 1 page, short for Margaret. It said, "I have thought at length about what you wrote. I have also thought about what I know of you and what your judgment has always been worth. I do not fully understand this woman, but I think I may have understood her incorrectly, which is not the same thing. I would like to meet her again, if she is willing, in the spring. On her own ground this time, not mine." Abigail held the letter. On her own ground. She folded it. She held it for a moment. Then she held it back out to him. "Tell her yes," she said. He took the letter. He looked at her. He was almost smiling, the real smile, the one she had seen come back to him slowly over months, the one that changed his whole face. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. His voice had dropped. Around them, the room was nearly empty now, just Pearl collecting her coat near the door, and Aldous straightening chairs, neither of them looking in their direction with what was almost artistic obviousness. She waited. "I want to ask you properly," he said. "I want to do it right, but I've been thinking about it for 2 months, and I think if I wait any longer for the perfect moment, I'll be waiting until spring, and I'm not willing to wait until spring." Her heart was doing something very particular. "Then ask," she said. He took her hands. Both of them, the way he had in her kitchen the night Tate's story was still running through town. The same hands she had then calloused and work-roughened and capable of building things that held. "I want to stand beside you," he said. "Not in front of you, not behind you, beside you. I want to watch you run that school and fight whatever needs fighting and build whatever needs building. And I want to do my own work on my own ground right next to yours, and I want that to be what we do, together, for the rest of it." She looked at him. She thought about July, a wagon stopping on a road, a deed in her coat, and $12 in her pocket, and a falling down house, and the whole weight of what she had come to prove. She thought about the roof and the porch and the windows and the latch plate and the chimney cap, and a Saturday morning with documents spread on a kitchen table, and Pearl's needle going in and out in the corner. She thought about a courtroom in August, and a different courtroom in December, and a boy named Caleb, who had decided his numbers mattered. She thought about what she had come here to build. She had built it. She had built it entirely, completely, without once surrendering the ground under her feet. And she was still standing on it. Right here, right now, both feet on the ground, she had earned holding the hands of a man who was not asking her to leave it. "Yes," she said. He lifted both her hands and pressed them briefly to his chest, just over his heart, and she felt it there, steady, present, certain. "Yes," she said again, because it deserved saying twice. Pearl, near the door, said something very quietly to Aldous. Aldous made the sound of a man who does not display emotion and is nevertheless having one. Brooks brought Abigail's hands down, but did not release them, and he looked at her the way he had been looking at her since July, when she hadn't let herself see it, and she looked back at him without any of the careful management she had spent months maintaining. Outside, Harlan County was going about its December morning. The children were going home to tell their families about the meeting, and the school would be open again on Thursday. And the Henderson girl was going to read a whole book before spring, and Caleb Marsh was going to be whatever he decided to be, because someone had given him the tools. And Abigail Carter, the ruined woman, The one they had all expected to be gone before the first snow. The one who had stepped off a wagon in July, with nothing but a deed, and her mother's memory, and a refusal so absolute, it had looked like foolishness to everyone who didn't understand that it was armor. Abigail Carter was still here. She had fixed what was broken, built what was missing, fought what needed fighting, and stood on her own ground through every moment of it. And she had done it not because someone came to save her. She had done it because she was the kind of woman who did not wait to be saved. And the man beside her had known that from the moment he watched her climb an unfamiliar roof and refused to come down until the work was done. That was the story Harlan Creek would tell about her in the years that followed, when people asked how it had all come to be. Not the ruined woman, not the fallen estate, not Tate or the hearing or the tavern gossip that had tried and failed to touch her. They would tell the story of a woman who arrived with nothing and built everything.